Yikes, are those Christmas bills coming in? Wait, hold on, that was last month. Now it's this month. But by popular demand, we're extending our New Year's solution 4.65% personal loan through February. Money for whatever you want at 4.65% APR from Bank Pacific. We're still celebrating.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal credit opportunity lender as low as 4.65%. Conditions apply.
Harvey Weinstein's lawyers say they will appeal his conviction on rape and sexual assault charges.
I think the evidence just didn't support a guilty finding on any counts. I think that the jury was in a position where they looked at a verdict sheet of 5 counts and felt that they couldn't walk out of there and convict him of nothing.
That's attorney Donna Rotuno on Fox's The Story, with Martha McCallum facing a 29-year sentence, possibly, after his conviction Monday. The judge ordered Weinstein taken to jail immediately, but he instead was transferred to a New York City hospital after complaining of chest pains. Weinstein also faces charges in California. He's always insisted that intimate relations with the women involved were consensual. A not guilty plea in Chicago from an actor accused of faking a hate crime against himself.
A special prosecutor recharged Jussie Smollett with 6 felony counts stemming from an alleged racist and homophobic attack that police say he staged last year. Charges were controversially dropped, and Smollett's attorney, Tina Glandian, vows to appeal the latest charges to the Illinois Supreme Court.
We're optimistic that the higher court will reverse this, or in this court, dismiss it for the double jeopardy grounds that we advanced.
In addition to the indictment, Chicago police have filed a suit to recover investigative costs, and Smollett is countersuing for malicious prosecution. In Chicago, Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
Vanessa Bryant has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the owner of the helicopter that crashed last month, killing her husband and her daughter. The suit says the pilot was negligent by flying in the fog. A wildfire burning through some forested areas, not in California, but in New Jersey. Started Sunday at Mount Tammany near the New Jersey Worthington State Forest and the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area. About 80 acres have been burned, but fire officials say as of late Monday, the blaze is about 80% contained. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
February 27th, it's the last call for leadership.
How do you grow a company? You grow a company by growing people. And when you grow them, they increase their capacity. When they increase their capacity, they begin to increase the capacity of what you can accomplish.
The voice of John C. Maxwell on the last chance to see the Live to Lead conference in November. Over 300 leaders and future leaders experienced a day full of big ideas, fun, and high-level motivation. For those who couldn't make it, we're doing it again. Registration closes soon. Get the details at guamtraining.com. Live to Lead is brought to you by Atkins Kroll, Guam's #1 car dealership. Also by Hawaiian Rock Products, the Guam Contractors Association, the Guam Daily Post, at 93.3 The Point. Energize your team. Join the Guam Live to Lead conference today.
Hafaday, this is Congressman Michael Nicholas. Our veterans deserve the best, and I'm working hard to make sure they receive what they earned defending our freedom. If you need help receiving the benefits you earned from the VA or the Defense Department, please call my office at 475-6453 or go online at stnicholas.house.gov. On behalf of a grateful community, thank you for your service.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael Nicholas.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of our free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Every day you'll tune in at 1600, and you'll hear me repeat that same part of the United States Constitution, the Second Amendment, as a very good preview of what's to come here on Tall Tales. Some Constitution, some talk about individual freedom, the rights of free people, a pretty good-sized dose of local politics, a little bit of national politics, some theory, some legal theory, some social theory, and all kinds of other things that are just make this program. No, it's no wonder that it's the top-rated FM radio talk show, afternoon radio talk show in the entire Western Pacific. It's just about without competition in that regard. So fasten your seatbelts and prepare to be airborne on the next flight of Tall Tales. The way we start out, after we pay appropriate obeisance to the Second Amendment, we go from there to that part of the program called Zemi Ikotni. Zemi Ikotni, that's my backwards bilingual play on words that translates to meet the press. I look at what appears on the editorial pages of our daily newspapers. I go through them with a fine-tooth comb as though I were as though I were a former English teacher, which is exactly what I was. I look for grammatical, factual, theoretical errors in the usage of the English language, etc. And when I find them, I point them out, of course. And having done all that, I would compare the editorials one to the other and determine which is the better of the two. The better of the two, then, is often awarded the coveted blue star. I've got my blue pencil right here. The blue star indicating a star of excellence. I've opined that if you were in the same neighborhood as the newspaper most recently receiving the coveted blue star, as I award the blue star, you could probably hear the champagne corks popping in the boardroom of the winning newspaper. The way it's been going for the last several months, you can take short odds on the Post, because the Daily News never wins, because they never run a local editorial on their editorial page. They'll run some boilerplate from USA Today or Gannett News Service and make you think that, well, this is our editorial page. Today is no exception. Today is something from this is the double. Let's talk about doubling down. Here we are. Kirsten Powers, a CNN news analyst, is a member of USA Today's board of contributors. So a CNN news analyst and a USA Today editorial. Yeah. Now, CNN, what is it that our president refers to? He has a brand for CNN. What does he call it, Real Joe Cruz?
Fake news?
Fake news. Yeah.
Yeah.
So fake news. Fake news writes up an editorial piece for fake news. Wow. Okay. So Kirsten says that Bernie really is electable, and she goes through she goes through some reasons that she thinks he's electable. I hope the Democrats keep thinking that, because I think it would be, I can't think of a better result than for Donald Trump to thump Bernie Sanders in the next election. As I'll explain as time goes on, the evil of socialism has crept back into the Overton window. You know, for a long, long time, up until probably 1991 and the disintegration of the Soviet Union, people avoided socialism like the plague. The last thing we wanted was socialism. But now, and I can blame this on a couple of things, socialism has now become vogue amongst young folks. One of the reasons that it's become popular amongst young folks is because young folks are young. And socialism is a kind of a share the wealth underpinning. And when you're young and you don't have much wealth, the whole idea of share the wealth sounds a whole lot more palatable to you than, say, when you're not so young and you've worked hard and accumulated some wealth that you don't want the state to force you to share. And then, of course, there's always the appeal of free stuff. You know, there's no such thing as a free lunch, but people keep looking for it anyhow. Socialism is not a free lunch. And then, of course, a couple of boogeymen here. The whole Frankfurt School-inspired theory of cultural Marxism, neo-Marxism, coupled with postmodernism and critical studies. All of these things are set to tear down the society in which we live, gaslight us into thinking that we really have a bad society, a bad country, and that we'd be so much better off if we got rid of all of our old traditions, like we're rapidly doing. Things like marriage and the family and so on. So it would be, I can't think of any political result that would make me happier than Donald Trump trouncing Bernie Sanders and perhaps putting that away for another few years. Okay, so much for the Daily News editorial. Thank you for reminding reminding me of that, Kirsten Powers. And now let's take a look at the Post. Here's what the Post says today. Feds must make Guam whole on cost of unmitigated migration. The federal government, according to the governor's latest tally, owes the government of Guam $150 million a year for hosting the unregulated entry of migrants from various nations with which the U.S. has a compact of free association. Through the COFA agreement, citizens of the Federated States of Micronesia, Republic of Palau, and Republic of the Marshall Islands can relocate to any U.S. state or territory. And for many citizens from these island nations, Guam has been and still is the destination of choice. Well, it's closer and cheaper. What Guam receives in compensation for hosting regional migrants is barely close to 10% of the estimated costs to Gov Guam. In Governor Leon Guerrero's State of the Island address, the first since completing a full year in office, the governor said she will press the U.S. government to pay the full $150 million. While the U.S. needs the compact agreements with the FSM, Palau and Marshall Islands to stay intact, especially in light of China's expansionist moves in the Pacific, Guam shouldn't be left to bear the bulk of the cost of hosting regional migrants, the governor contends. While the compacts help to offset China's growing influence in the Western Pacific and preserve national security interests, Guam is left to fund the consequences of unmitigated migration. Now, I know what migration is, and I know what unmitigated is, but I have a hard time putting the two words together. Unmitigated migration. Let's take the word mitigate. If a person, for instance, has been convicted of a crime, when it's time for sentencing, a judge will look at what the defendant has done. He'll look at aggravating circumstances. And, whoa, boy, wash your mouth out with soap, Bob. The judge will look at aggravating circumstances. They will consider the heinousness, the extra heinousness of the crime. And the judge, that is they, will also take into consideration mitigating circumstances, offsetting circumstances. So I don't see how the word unmitigated migration, those two words go together. What would mitigated migration look like? I don't know. Anyhow, that's what the governor said. The U.S. has an obligation to make Guam whole when it comes to shouldering the costs of this regional migration. The governor also said she will continue to advocate a reliable screening of regional migrants, which she said means preventing known criminals from entering Guam. Now, the way it is right now, a person from any one of the three freely associated states can come to Guam not as a permanent resident, not as a non-immigrant alien or a permanent resident, but as an habitual resident. And the requirements to be admitted as an habitual resident is only the necessity to prove that a person is a citizen of one of the three freely associated states. So if you come whipping up here with an FSM passport, that's all you need. No visa. And of course, it's at the visa issuing stage that countries sort out the desirable from the undesirable people who would enter their boundaries. But because of the way the treaties are worded, that's not available to us. Now, I have made the suggestion in the past that what we would consider is getting in touch with the president of the FSM and asking him to screen people, immigrants, that is, out-migrants from the FSM, before they leave, and create a system of exit permits so that one wanting to leave the FSM for Guam would need an exit permit, and in order to do that, he would have to show that he's going to go to school or he's going to go to work when he gets here, not that he's going to lay around under a coconut tree and drink beer all day. I don't know if that's possible or not. It's certainly worth consideration, but to try to do it on this end is pretty hard. The editorial goes on to say regional migrants, I'm not so sure they're migrants, but I'll let it go, are allowed to stay on Guam only if they are here for work or to get an education. However, these conditions on regional migrants have never really been enforced by the federal government, and I don't think they ever will be enforced. It would be a gigantic undertaking for the national government to try to enforce those laws, and as we all know, they're pretty busy in a lot of other places, like along the border with Mexico, for instance. Now, there may be another fix here, and I'm just kind of skylarking here, but given Guam's peculiar relationship with the United States, being a territory of the United States, it might very well be possible for the president to delegate some of the enforcement authority to Guam officials so that Guam officials could enforce those rules, find people who are FAS migrants who are laying around under a coconut tree drinking beer instead of working or going to school, and turn those folks over to customs and I don't remember which one it is, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, for deportation. Again, I don't know if it would work, but it's certainly worth considering. GovGuam must press the federal government to do its job of screening migrants and ensuring those who are here in compliance with conditions of their stay. Immigrants from various nations are held to a certain set of standards, so there's no reason why compact migrants should be treated differently. Loose use of language here. Immigrants from various nations. We have people here from various nations who are not immigrants, who are non-resident aliens. Well, Guam must be a place of opportunity for everyone, regardless of their race or creed. There can be no reward without accountability. Those who habitually avoid responsibility, those who do not seek to better themselves through education, violate the spirit of the compact agreements, and those who commit crimes against our community will be subject to deportation, the governor said. I got to stop here for a second. Now, this is grossly misunderstood. An alien in the United States who commits a serious crime, or sometimes a not so serious crime in the United States, is subject to deportation. An alien in the United States who commits a crime is sent to prison, at least in this jurisdiction. When he is about to be released from prison, the prison officials will notify the Immigration and Customs ICE, we've got a deportable alien and we're about to release. So there will be an ICE agent at the prison the day that the person is let out of prison. We'll take that prisoner in custody, fill out some papers, and give him right back to the prison, because he will stay there until they put him on a plane and send him back to wherever he's deported to. The reason he goes back into the prison is because the U.S. Bureau of Prisons has a contract with our Department of Corrections that we will house all federal detainees and federal inmates. So an alien awaiting deportation is a detainee who ought to be housed in our jail, but our jail is in such sad shape, it's hard to know where that person would be housed right now. So this is not really something that the governor has any control over, unless the governor wants to create Guam as a sanctuary island. Now, in some jurisdictions in the U.S., prison officials will not cooperate with the INS people, with the immigration people. So when that alien is turned loose, unless the immigration folks have some other way of finding out about it, away he goes. And if they catch him some other time, he would be deported. So the editorial says, GovGuam can start by looking at the prison population. Anyone convicted of deportable crimes should be turned over to U.S. immigration authorities without delay. Well, we can't turn them over to immigration authorities during the time they're serving a sentence in our prison. Now, Governor Calvo got around this by commuting sentences to time served so that the alien could be turned over to immigration authorities and deported from the island. Before he did that, the governor had a novel approach, which was to commute the sentence of a prisoner with a condition. And the condition was that the prisoner would go back to his home island and never come back to Guam. Enforceability was never tested. And of course, we had to pay the cost for that. But I always ask this question: do we want to set up a double standard for criminals? Let's say a citizen of Guam commits a bank robbery and is sentenced to 10 years in the penitentiary. He's never paroled, so he serves his full 10 years and then 3 more years of parole after that. And then we have someone from the Federated States who commits a bank robbery. He's put in prison, and we say, oh, we got to get rid of these folks. So we commute his sentence to time served, turn him over to immigration, and he goes back to the FSM. Does that picture make a whole lot of sense? One of the reasons that we put people in prison, is to deter others from committing the same crime. Well, you kind of blow the deterrence aspect of prison when you let people out and punish them by sending them to their homes. So I don't know if this is such a good idea here or not, Daily Post. This is the kind of thing that I say that I look for the various theories contained in the editorials, and if necessary, am critical of them. I'm critical of this one. And then finally, it would also help if the island nations' governments, as a courtesy to the Guam community, help to repatriate their citizens who are convicted of breaking local and federal laws on Guam. Well, once again, this shows a lack of understanding, because an inmate, an alien who's deported, it doesn't cost us anything. That comes out of the Fed's wallet. only under the Calvo-style deportation did it cost us anything, and I think there were only 3 or 4 of those. So once again, Post, as a courtesy to the Guam community, would help to repay they should help to repay their citizens. No, that's just wrong. So I hate to tell you this again, Post, you're on a subject that needs to be editorialized, but no blue star again today. It's been something of a slump here for the Post. Okay, so we have paid our respects to the Second Amendment. We have done our usual Zemi-Ikotny, and from there we go to the card. And the first item on the card is Tall Tales versus the Burn. And I have here 14 questions for Bernie Sanders that Charles Lane asked in the WAPO of all places. So this editorial writer for WAPO wants the Burn to answer 14 questions. I've gone through the first 3. Here's the 4th one that ought to be asked of Bernie Sanders. You seek to end all oil and gas fracking by 2025, abolishing an industry that directly or indirectly employs 10,000s of people at often good-paying blue-collar jobs in states such as Colorado, Ohio, New Mexico, North Dakota, and Texas. There are 80,000 fracking-related jobs just in Pennsylvania, which President Trump carried by 44,292 votes in 2016, Mr. Bernie Sanders. And if these working class Americans ask for a detailed plan that ensures that they and their families will not be worse off under a Sanders administration, what would you tell them? Here's what Bernie would tell them. Well, your kids are going to get to go to college for free. And then we're going to forgive all student debt. Sometimes I wonder if Bernie, when he's on the debate stage, I wonder if he's actually going to get airborne. Okay, so much for the Burn. We'll come back to the Burn again tomorrow. Question number 5.
Cocoa Coffee Company is now available at Circle K. Single origin coffee beans carefully sourced and locally roasted to give you the freshest cup of coffee Guam has to offer. Grab a cup that's brewed every 30 minutes or purchase a bag of the locally roasted whole beans. Flavors now serving: light medium roasted Ethiopia and medium dark roasted Jamaican Blue Mountain. Exclusively available at Circle K. With every Cocoa Coffee Company purchase, a portion of the proceeds will go towards the Cocoa Recovery Program.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
We now return to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, soaring over the confusion with his superpowers of truth. Call 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Now, here we go. Next item on the card is Jim Moylan versus Raging Lee. And this is kind of an old story here. You'll recall that Jim Moylan introduced a bill that required certain details in travel reports that hadn't been required in the past. And when this came up, it was apparent that Senator Raging Lee was the the number 1 traveler in the legislature, done more traveling than anybody. But she had 2 really good defenses. First was the subject of her traveling. She took 4 trips. 2 of them were to APIL. Now that, I'm so happy that she went to APIL because I know that makes my life so much better. And then the other trip, she went to the United Nations. And I can't tell you how happy I am when people from our government go to the United Nations and badmouth the United States. So that was a pretty good defense. And then she had a real bare-knuckle defense after Jim Moylan said, we need more reports, et cetera, and it came out that she was the lead traveler, had done the most traveling. She came back really hard at Jim Moylan, and she said, well, maybe if he weren't so busy concentrating on the Super Bowl, he would know about our travel regulations. So she said he missed the Super Bowl Monday. Well, it turns out that he did miss Super Bowl Monday. He was on a trip that had begun before the legislature even went in session, and he couldn't have. He would have had to been I should have let him borrow my crystal ball. Then he probably could have been there. But Raging came really right back on him and said, "Well, you criticize, you start making a fuss about travel, and I'm going to ding you for missing school." No, I'm not missing school. Not being tardy, for missing session. So I guess Raging really snapped back.
And now it's time for a public service announcement.
It's 4:30 o'clock. Do you know where your senator is?
This public service announcement was inspired by Senator Raging Lee.
Okay, well, there we go. I got Chris, former Senator Chris Duenas, talk show host on the Ray Gibson show online. Good afternoon, Chris.
Half a day, Bob. I saw you in your very dapper-looking suit last night, front and center, and looking good.
Well, don't be taken in, Chris. You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear.
Self-deprecation is so humble. You know what? When I first
I am kind of humble, Chris, and also I'm very proud of my humility. But anyhow, go on with what you're saying.
Excellent. So when Real Joe picked up the line here, I said, "Let's keep burning," and he had that excellent laughter.
Mm-hmm.
So what I was meaning was I just wanted to make a few comments on the burn as you were speaking about that before the break.
Good.
But I have something I came up with for a Bob-ism. And on the very, very rare occasion where Bob may be incorrect, which is very, very rare, he may sometimes be incorrect, but he's always right.
Oh, yeah, okay. Right.
You like it?
Yeah, I like it very much. And of course, if put on my proofs, I could say, well, right means not left.
Exactly.
And even if by you really need a good imagination to deal with this hypothetical, but if I should be wrong about something, it wouldn't detract from the fact that I'm still not left. Right, Chris?
That's why Bob is always right, and I join you there. On the burn, as I watch the national programming, it seems like the real panic on the left, far left, I always like to say they're so far left, there's no left, is the fact that with Bernie's surge and probably inevitable nomination, or at least something that might get stolen at the Democratic convention, the real panic is that with his nomination, really there's a no-lose situation. And I have a local, kind of a local hitch to this. And that is that with Bernie at the top, they're so worried, even if for some miracle he would pull it out and win, that the down ballot races, there would be so much carnage that the true check and balance, which is the Congress, would more than likely disallow any of his extreme socialist radical agenda.
True.
You concur?
I do, yeah.
And I think that, so when you look at Nancy Pelosi and Chuck and all of those folks in Congress, you kind of get an idea, why they also have a problem with that, because they look at the situation and say, even if for some reason we held our nose and could have a Democrat nominee and somebody who we thought could be President Bernie Sanders, it's like, what happens to us? Because I think it will almost be certain that there would be a check and balance. Although I don't see that happening, I see President Trump almost certainly winning re-election. But I think that's the real trepidation on the Democratic side, other than just that having an individual take the party that far left, which a lot of seems to be a lot of migration to. But I use that in a local context after listening to our governor last night and kind of watching and having checked in with you a time or two on the report card for the legislature, and that is, in a few months here, I think we need a major change in the legislature for a real check and balance on our island as well.
Agreed.
Yeah, so I'm hoping for that, and I think that I looked at the speech as basically kind of state of the island light. I heard a lot of continuing initiatives from the prior administration on successful programs. The only real novel idea that I heard outright was this idea of universal health care, which I'd like to see the plan for. It sounds ambitious, and it sounds like something that's kind of far-reaching at this point, given the fact that we're having such difficulty with even the most basic operational items. So that was my take. I wonder if you concur with seeing that you had a front row seat.
Yes, I concur. I'm going to spend a little time on that utopian universal health care plan for sure, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Well, I look forward to hearing it.
I would say this. I thought her, just grading her as a speech teacher, I thought her delivery was probably the best I've ever seen from her. I do agree with that. And the speech was well put together if one weren't concentrating on the content. So obviously she's had some pretty good people helping her with it, but the whole universal health care thing is quite scary. Going back to your thesis on Bernie and the more conservative members of Congress, here's something else to worry about, Chris. Mm-hmm. The squad. Because AOC says she started a PAC to primary all of the people in Congress that are not liberal enough for her. So, it could very well be that we get kind of swept up in this wave of liberalism, a temporary aberration that could put too many liberals in the Congress. Mm-hmm. I mean, if AOC could get elected, that really kind of shows you that the bar is a lot lower than we used to think it was. Yeah, although you remember Nancy's comment on her election? I think that I remember it somewhere along these lines, although I do agree with you how dangerous and scary that is, especially how she propelled that election forward. But she said the district and the amount of a handful of thousands of votes where AOC was elected is that if you pumped enough money in there, you could probably get as long as the cup of coffee was a Democrat, it would be elected. That's true. That's true. So yeah, I hope that the antidote to that would be the policies, the strong policies that President Trump has put forward, and
I know that the current minority leader is really on an aggressive push. Supposedly the Republicans, and particularly a large number of Republican women, you know that the women thing now, which I agree with, and I wouldn't step over that line at all, but you know, it must be that we're out there and making that pronouncement. But supposedly the Republican Party's done a lot of recruitment too stateside to put together a formidable force running for the Senate and for the House. So hopefully that's the antidote to an attempt on AOC and the squad.
Yeah, good point, Chris.
You know, going back just real quickly to this universal health care, I mean, the idea of folks showing up at GMH in particular and other hospitals, of course, they're stabilized and then transferred, particularly if they're of the indigent population. You know, it has been a constant issue when the discussion is that the failure of the ability to collect and the so-called 3Ms or the payer groups and the payer mix with regard particularly to GMH it has a lot to do with the problems financially at the hospital. And I don't think the overall attempt on some level to provide some level of insurance to the most of the population that you can is not necessary. I don't see that as a bad idea. The problem, the bad idea I see is the fact that coming out of the government at this point, going back to, and I don't like being that guy, but I guess every once in a while we should be that guy. You know, we look at our situation with something as basic as swimming pools. We look at something as basic as the time it takes us to respond to and get, more officers on the beat. When DOC is in crisis, how we react to that. Something as complex as a big, good idea, I just don't think that most people on the street now are buying that. That's something that we would have our government trying to pull off.
You remember GMHP, Chris?
I do, and they left a lot of people hanging.
They did.
Yeah. So I look forward to listening to your analysis on that, Bob, and I thank you for the time.
Okay, it's always a pleasure talking to you, Chris, and I really appreciate your, it's a little bit taking me aback to think that you might consider that I might be wrong about anything. But I suppose as long as we're just talking theoretically, I do appreciate your willingness to come up with a good line for me that even when I'm wrong, I'm still right. So thank
remember, Bob, I said on a very rare occasion.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Chris. Thanks for calling.
Take care.
All right. So, Chris Duenas. Now, next item on the card is, let's see, how did I title it? I titled it Lou versus Tina and the Government of Guam. So I want to start out first. I did go last night, and I had a front row seat, and I was able to measure the facial expressions of the people who were sitting up front. And I want to start out talking about Tina. And first of all, it's not what Tina did, Real Joe Cruz. You know what it was?
It's what she didn't do.
It's what Tina didn't do. Just like the dog didn't bark when the robber came in and committed the murder. So we put on your Sherlock Holmes hat there, Real Joe Cruz, your deer slayer hat. Yeah, it's what Tina didn't do. Lou finished her speech. Tina sat there and listened to the whole thing. She didn't make faces or grimace or signal anybody in the audience what to do or not do. And finally, when Lou was finished, Tina did not take a copy of the speech and tear it up.
Wow.
Yeah. So I just don't know what to make of that. I guess maybe Tina liked the speech, or she likes Lou, or she likes Lou and the speech. Okay, so I've got the pretty comprehensive coverage here by the Post in my hand. And starts out, Governor Lou Leon Guerrero announced Monday night her administration will work on universal health coverage for Guam, as she declared the local government's finances have stabilized. Well, it's hard to know what to make of the local government's finances, because at one time we had $19 million more than what we had booked, but we weren't going to spend it. No sense introducing bills. And then we decided we'd start handing out $14 million of that money to people who had war claims. And then later on, let's see here, I had an article that I was going to use the other day. An article that came from KUAM, where Lou said the revenues that we've collected, that is beyond the revenues projected for 2019, I want to put those in reserves, Governor Leon Guerrero said. And by law for 2020, we do have a rainy day fund of about 2%. And so we're doing that. And that, to me, is the method and strategy that we should use. Put away money that we have collected for the crisis situations like this. There is concern, absolutely, and we're doing everything we can to help mitigate the impact. And the only words not included in her sentence were mitigate the impact on the government of Guam. So I'll be back in a couple minutes here. We got to take a short break, and we'll come right back to Lou's speech.
If you own a Toyota, please listen to this. It could help you avoid injury, maybe save your life. The Takata airbags installed in certain Toyotas can explode and shoot out sharp metal fragments at people inside the vehicle. You don't need to be in a collision. They could explode any time. In the U.S., these airbags have caused 26 deaths. There's been a worldwide recall of Takata airbags, and most have had the faulty parts replaced. But here in Guam, there are still over 3,000 Toyotas on the road with potentially lethal airbags, and yours could be one of them. So please, take your Toyota to Atkins Grow, even if you didn't buy it from us, and get the inflator replaced. It costs you nothing. It takes just about an hour, and it could save a life, yours or someone you love. The AK song says we're here for life. That's never been more true.
At Atkins Grow, we're here.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm going to take a break here from my critique of last night's State of the Island speech to talk to a regular visitor known colloquially as Our Carl. Good afternoon, Our Carl.
Hey, Bob. Good afternoon. Since this seems to be the topic of interest now, I'm going to have to bone up by reading some of Thomas Sowell's opinion pieces about medical care, which I haven't done yet. But, anytime that a country does this, as far as universal health care, what always results, because there are limited resources, there's only so many doctors, and there's only so many hospitals, there's only so many resources, and when things are supposedly free, and I'm using air quotes around the word free, people tend to overuse it, for every little thing, because they know they're not going to be charged for it, so big deal, And so the resources get maxed out, and there's often long waiting periods. Now, for things like a sniffle or a cold, that's not a big deal. But for things like cancer, that can be absolutely disastrous. And I've seen just horror stories of people in countries, like Canada and Britain, that have had to wait months for surgical procedures, life-saving surgical procedures. Now, when people are rich, like the lead singer for the Rolling Stones, he did not stay in Great Britain. He came to America for his surgery. He flew in his private jet and paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for the best treatment, the best rooms, the best medicine. So it didn't affect him. It doesn't affect the rich, the elites, but people that are at the bottom who will have their private options destroyed, those are the ones that are going to be affected. And I'm just shocked that anyone is bringing this idea up with what we're seeing now, with how the government is handling our hospital, how it can't even properly manage a pool, how our schools are falling apart. I'm thinking specifically of one down the street from me, Benevente Middle School. If anyone wants to see sort of a picture of the public-run school system, I'd suggest driving by Benevente Middle School. And it's just it's kind of a visual representation of our public school system. So since government is proving itself incapable of doing some of these critical things, I find it shocking that there's actually people who are saying, well, since that's the case, let's just expand it and let them take care of all our medical care, since they've proven how well they can handle lesser needs. It's just I just shake my head, as they say on Facebook, SMH.
Right. Yeah. Well, I introduced the a new word here a couple months ago: kakistocracy, government by those least capable of performing the task. And that seems to be what we have across the board. It's hard to find a part of the government that's really functioning well. I always used to hold out the CCU as an example, a contra-example of a part of the government that was functioning well. Our two utilities have improved dramatically. Unfortunately for me, the CCU kind of took a black eye over the open government violation, but it's really hard to find a part of the government where we say, yes, those guys really do a great job.
Yeah, well, this is to me, it's kind of predictable, based on what I've been reading and observing, especially in the mainland. Starting in the 60s, the radical 60s, a lot of extreme leftists started infiltrating the Democrat Party, and which is typical Gramsci, infiltrate the means of cultural production, and one of those is the political parties, at least one of the political parties, and that would be the Democrat Party. So we're seeing the fruit of those decades of planting those seeds in our institutions that produce culture. And in this case, we're seeing it in government. So what we're seeing locally is, I think, pretty predictable, and we're just going to see more of it. And you've brought up that there's where this is all eventually leading, which is anytime you have extreme leftists or neo-Marxists, it can only end in one place, and that is socialist utopia. So this is just going to get more and more louder, the cries for this utopian vision to be realized. So I'd suggest strapping in and holding on tight, because there's more to come. I can guarantee it, and you can too, I'm sure.
That's right, Carl.
All right, Bob. Well, anyway, thank you for allowing me to toss in my 2 bits. I appreciate it.
You always add a lot to the program, Carl. Thanks for calling.
Thank you.
Okay, that's our Carl. So, the little squib I read from KOAM stands for the proposition that Lou said, don't worry, I've got everything covered. I've got the over collection. I've got the rainy day fund. The government of Guam is going to be fine. Now, these other peons out there that are not, quote, our people, I don't know about them, but the government, I've set it up so we'll be fine. And I have to kind of wonder if that's what she means by our finances have been stabilized. We've got a 25% increase in the GRT that we're going to keep forever. And we're 14,000 arrivals down as far as our tourist industry is concerned. The governor not only said she would not support the rollback or the temporary abatement of the increase of the minimum wage. She said, if the legislature passes it, I'm going to veto it. I had an item on the card, Christine Boleto versus Lulian Guerrero, where the chamber made what I thought was a reasonable proposition. And what did the governor do? Not only rejected it, but again, doubled down. No, I'm not going to do that. And besides that, if the legislature passes a bill, I'll veto it. I'll get to that in the speech. So she's, the universal health coverage to me is the most important part of the whole speech. And for me, it's the scariest part of the whole speech. Now, I go down to the third paragraph of this article here, which says, contrary to a small chorus of cynics, we've improved our cash flow. So when she says a small chorus of cynics, I take that as direct disrespect of our international radio listening audience. I think that our international radio listening audience is indeed cynical, but I wouldn't call them a small chorus, and I don't think you're going to want them call them a small chorus come next election either, Governor Leon Guerrero. Okay, it's time for the halftime show. Let's break for the halftime show. I'll be back in about 7 minutes.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
The India trip, day 2. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. President Trump at this hour just concluding a meeting with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi. It's the second day of his 2-day visit, beginning with ceremonies that included a wreath laying at the tomb of Mahatma Gandhi, and the President and First Lady planting a tree in Gandhi's honor. On Monday, the President addressed a crowd of 100,000 people at an outdoor rally.
America loves India. America respects India. And America will always be faithful and loyal friends to the Indian people.
Later, the President and First Lady will be hosted at an elaborate state dinner. The administration with an emergency funding request to Congress asking for $2.5 billion to fight the coronavirus outbreak. Some of the money to help state and local governments prepare. The outbreak may force the U.S. to scale back or cancel joint military exercises with South Korea.
South Korea's defense minister says the situation in his country is, quote, quite serious and has compelled authorities to limit the movement of troops as his country has the second largest number of cases of coronavirus in the world, with over 800 reported.
That's Fox's Sean Lanchel in Washington with 229 infections reported in Italy. Its neighbors, including Austria and Slovenia, limiting travel. Infections also reported in Iran for the first time and in Afghanistan and Kuwait. The stock market suffering its worst day in 2 years Monday over coronavirus fears. The Dow dropping more than 1,000 points, but Dow futures suggesting a possible rebound are more than 240 points higher. A packed house in L.A. Monday for the Kobe and Gianna Bryant's memorial service. And hardly a dry eye.
In the game of basketball, in life, as a parent, Kobe left nothing in the tank. He left it all on the floor.
Michael Jordan. America is listening to Fox News.
Yikes, are those Christmas bills coming in? Wait, hold on, that was last month. Now it's this month. But by popular demand, we're extending our New Year's solution 4.65% personal loan through February. Money for whatever you want at 4.65% APR from Bank Pacific. We're still celebrating.
Bank Pacific. Where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal credit opportunity lender as low as 4.65%. Conditions apply.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tumon is stirring up some of your favorite drinks all night long. Come down on Wednesday and Friday nights from 5:30 to 10 p.m. Indulge in some of your favorite local cuisine and pair it with your favorite drink. From our ice-cold beers, our finest selection of wines and liquors, to our top-notch cocktail specials, your friends at Mezcla Bistro Tumon are ready to serve you. Why limit happy to only an hour? The Mezcla family reminds everyone to drink responsibly. See you on Wednesday and Friday night.
A verdict Monday in Harvey Weinstein's rape trial. Guilty on 2 counts, not guilty on 3 others.
The jury finding the movie mogul guilty of criminal sexual act for assaulting Mimi Haley in 2006. The jury also convicting him on third-degree rape against accuser Jessica Mann in 2013. The jurors acquitting him, however, on some of the more serious offenses like predatory sexual assault and rape in the first degree. His lawyers say they plan to appeal and will try to have the 67-year-old released on house arrest while he awaits his March 11th sentencing. Weinstein still faces more charges in a sexual assault case in California. Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance saying this is a new landscape for survivors of sexual assault in America. In New York, Alex Hogan, Fox News.
Weinstein was ordered to jail immediately, but instead went to New York's Bellevue Hospital complaining of chest pains. A decades-old cold case killing solved in Iowa with a conviction Monday. 66-year-old Jerry Burns found guilty of first-degree murder for stabbing 18-year-old Michelle Martinko to death in December of 1979. Her body was found inside her family's car at a shopping mall in Cedar Rapids. The conviction carries a mandatory term of life in prison. NASA mourning the death of Katherine Johnson, one of several mathematicians who performed the intricate calculations for spaceflight, but her contributions largely unheralded until Hollywood told her story.
Her life and other trailblazing black women at NASA depicted in the 2016 Oscar-nominated film Hidden Figures. NASA announcing her death on Twitter, posting her bravery and commitment to excellence leaves an eternal legacy for us all. Virginia Senator Mark Warner posting, "I'm so glad she lived to see the recognition that she and her fellow NASA Hidden Figures so rightly deserved for their important work on the space program." Katherine Johnson was 101 years old. Kristen Goodwin, Fox News.
And in New York, I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
February 27th, it's the last call for leadership.
If you want to add value to people, you have to know and relate to what other people value. You see, great leaders are first of all listeners, and then they're learners, and then they're leaders.
The voice of John C. Maxwell, who leads a team of world-class speakers on the last chance to see the Live to Lead conference in November. Over 300 leaders and future leaders experienced a day full of big ideas, fun, and high-level motivation. For those who couldn't make it, we're doing it again. Registration closes soon. Get the details at GuamTraining.com. Live to Lead is brought to you by Atkins Kroll, Guam's #1 car dealership. Also by Personal Finance Center and the Guam Chamber of Commerce. Energize your team. Join the Guam Live to Lead conference today.
If you've ever struggled for breath, you know what a scary experience it is. Whether you have asthma, emphysema, COPD, lung cancer, or another respiratory illness, the right medical treatment makes all the difference. GRMC's Pulmonology Clinic has the latest technology and respiratory equipment, staffed by world-class pulmonologists. Make an appointment today with GRMC's Pulmonology Clinic and start breathing easier. GRMC, where patients are partners.
Hafaday, this is Congressman Michael Nicholas. Our veterans deserve the best, and I'm working hard to make sure they receive what they earned defending our freedom. If you need help receiving the benefits you earned from the VA or the Defense Department, please call my office at 475-6453 or go online at stnicholas.house.gov. On behalf of a grateful community, thank you for your service.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael Nicholas.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Okay, so here I am again looking at the Post article covering the governor's speech. One personal point that I want to raise here. She talked about the schools. She said the administration fiscal 2021 budget includes funding for the first phase of competitive salary adjustments starting with teachers and nurses. Perhaps not a bad idea. I'm wondering, though, about the other things necessary for an adequate public education. I'm looking here at I have in front of me here the 14 points that have been established by law as constituting an adequate public education. Number one on the list is a certified teacher for every class and a ratio established by relevant collective bargaining agreements. So if we're not hiring enough teachers, then it makes sense to pay more to hire enough teachers. As is so often pointed out, Ken points out that the product that we're turning out of our schools is substandard. So I was glad to see that she put some emphasis on education, paying teachers more money, but I think she should have gone a little farther into the 14 points on that one. The thing that I want to spend a little time with here is the whole idea of health care and the proper role of our government with respect to health care. Now, you've heard me say it over and over again. What I want to see, I don't know if anybody else wants to see the same thing, but what I want to see is an effective, efficient government operating within the rule of law, providing basic government services. And I would admit that there can be some quibbling about what amounts to basic government services. And we always talk in terms of the big three: education, public safety, and medical care. We have a hospital, and our Organic Act said that if we have a hospital, the governor must be in charge of it. But, you know, there's a myth here that the governor is responsible for the health care of everybody on island. Not so. What happens is that there is a federal statute that says that if you have an emergency room, you can't turn anybody away from an emergency room for emergency treatment. So how does a doctor determine whether someone who comes to the emergency room has an emergent problem? Well, he's got to kind of take a look at him and examine him. So I suppose that's a form of health care. I'm going to take a stop here for a second. I noticed that the Real Joe Cruz has opened the Joe line, correct, Real Joe Cruz?
Correct, sir.
Yeah, we have another Joe on the line right now. We have a Joe here at all times. That would be the Real Joe Cruz. And occasionally we have a temporary Joe or a provisional Joe known as another Joe, correct? Another Joe?
Hey, Uncle Bob. So the issue of they can't turn anyone away, it looks good on paper, but in practice...
Yeah, let me stop here now. This you can't turn anyone away applies only to the emergency room.
Okay.
If somebody waltzes up to the hospital and says, I really think I'm too ugly to get a job, I want to go be admitted to the hospital for plastic surgery, we can say, sorry, Charlie, we're not going to do that for you. But go on, another Joe.
Okay. So, unfortunately, I had a friend who was admitted to the hospital more than once. And so the first time, the doctor, it's really the discretion of the doctor to discharge the patient. And very often they discharge the patient back to the street. There's no I don't know what you would call it. There's no successful attempt to make certain that the individual isn't going back to basically live on the street in some capacity. And the reason for the health, part of the reason for the bad health, I think could be argued because of the lifestyle, living more or less on the street, almost homeless, was part of the issue. So the second time the gentleman was admitted, by the time that he was discharged, they found he had organ failure, and he didn't survive very long after that. He would go to dialysis, and I just thought, man, if they had just paid that much attention, more attention, the year before, the first time he was admitted, that he probably would be alive today. So there's quite a few issues here on island that, for one reason or another, we're not taking care of our people. And I think Uncle Bob is one of the big reasons. I think there's this feeling and instinct that we need to take care of, a sense of a Chamorro identity, I think. And you could argue, well, can't you take care of everyone? That's a humane factor. Yeah, but I learned the ropes of what where to go when you're sick, and my elders took me to a Suruhana. They had me go to take awful medicine. I don't even know what it was at the time when I was sick, and this is just part of our tradition, part of our culture, and it's up to the next generation, who is the age they consider to be the leaders, usually in your late 30s and 40s and 50s, to take over and continue these traditions of taking care of each other. So it's difficult to know how to do this, and so maybe the government isn't the place to find all these solutions, but we want to believe we can turn to our government leaders, unless there was an alternative or several alternatives. It was a nice one. I don't know if I've taken too long to share that story, or if I got too off subject, but I just wanted to share that much and say that my personal experience has been, I don't feel that we're doing enough to help our people, our fellow human beings, residents here on this island, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed.
Who do you mean by we? Another Joe?
Well, there's the if it's the government, the standard should be everyone, right? You're talking about the government of Guam.
So the we is the government. The we is the government of Guam.
Well, if we is the private sector, or just I don't know, groups, little groups that organize to assist, let's say specifically in the interest of Chamorro tradition, Suruhanas, then the we would be, people who we know that feel comfortable being assisted within a group influence, or a group sphere of influence, so to speak. I'm sorry I'm not as articulate as you, but finding a way to do it with or without the government's assistance. Maybe most of the time just with our own without the government's assistance. But I just thought I'd bring that up because the hospital, it's a place we usually go to, and then the alternatives would be the Suruhanas. But I don't want to get too off subject. I know you were worried about the single payer, I think, and there's so many issues to bring up with regards to healthcare. But anyway, so do you think I've gone off on a tangent there, Uncle Bob, or am I still on subject?
I think you kind of went off on a tangent there, Another Joe. You want to try to get back on, or?
Yeah, if it doesn't take too much time. So, what do you feel was the starting point when as far as what we're talking about right now.
The government's role in providing health care.
Well, usually the government isn't as good as the private sector, right? And the professionals. And the more that the government stays out of the way, in theory, those are the best results usually. And the government usually is only required to step in when there are serious issues that the usual leaders cannot cope with on their own. Let's say, for example, epidemics. I don't know if you would already classify the coronavirus as an epidemic, but big issues, capital improvements. Usually, that's something.
Well, let me give you some hypothetical cases, okay, Real Joe Cruz?
Sure.
Yeah, let's say that I really like to drink, okay. And every day after work I knock off a couple of 6-packs, and it works pretty well. But I get to be around 40 years old, and I'm starting to look kind of yellowish around the edges. So I go to a doctor, and the doctor says, "You got a bad liver, kid. You're not looking good at all. You need to stop drinking, because if you don't, it's going to kill you."
Yep.
And the guy says, "Okay, thanks, doc. Do you want me to come back?" And the doctor says, "Yeah, I'll come back." And the guy says, "Okay, I'll stop back on my way home from the bar." And the guy keeps drinking, and pretty soon he winds up in the hospital, and he needs a liver transplant because he has ruined his liver by drinking too much. Now, how much of that it should be my responsibility that he has ruined his own liver?
I would say I wouldn't say it's your responsibility, Uncle Bob. I would say it's all of our responsibility to be aware.
Well, if it's everybody's responsibility, then it's nobody's responsibility. That's pretty basic.
Well, what I mean is to be aware. Just be aware of this individual. That this individual has been acknowledged and has been advised to discontinue drinking, and that is, I think, the extent of our responsibility. As far as you're talking about a moral morals and a guilty, whether you have a guilty conscience, if you've already done that much, acknowledge the individual and given a sound advisement, then you don't have to feel as though you haven't done enough. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
So who should pay for his liver transplant?
No, I wouldn't say that it's a requirement.
Okay,
I would say, but it is important to know the individual, because how do you judge it? You have to know the individual.
That's the point I'm going to make with a couple more hypotheticals, but I'll short circuit the process. Who will make these decisions as to which individual is worthy of me pitching in and paying for his medical care? Who will make that decision, Real Joe Cruz?
Well, that's
government?
very interesting. It's an interesting, tricky question, because the reason I say that is because the logic would seem to be that it's the individual's responsibility as to their health. However, in practice, we know that political groups can influence the system, and therefore, what you think as sound logic will not be the only factors to make the decision. I don't know if
you're absolutely right, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. Do we make these decisions based on a couple of principles that have been with us for a long, long time, like individual responsibility, individual freedom, taking care of yourself and your family? Or do we make these decisions based on, well, it's the government, so they have to do it?
No. I think where I'm trying to differentiate the scenario, Bob, is when someone is like mentally impaired or they are not articulate, and because of that, they don't voice their position and they don't offer the justification, and they're not that bad. That's like for example, the man that I befriended and he had organ failure. He was not an alcoholic. I've never seen him drink. Never smelled alcohol in him. For whatever the reason, he had organ failure, and I don't know the reasons. And but presuming that there was no particular other than not eating healthy foods, but there was nothing illegal involved, then it doesn't feel as a Christian that we've done enough not to address the issue of this individual just is not really good at communicating, that he needs a step up. He needs help. He needs to be taken off the street, given a place, that where he's not literally sleeping outside, exposed to the elements as much, and given the opportunity to get work.
And who's going to pay for it?
No, and just the free market, just people who are qualified, applying for the job and getting work. You just having access, having your people to vouch for you, or to usually you get a recommendation, that sort of thing. But I wouldn't say, it's too much to ask, and if it is, then it should be a community issue to discuss, to clarify why is it too much to ask to assist someone to help themselves, instead of we're not babysitting them, and it's not like we're doing everything for them. So why not try to help others to help themselves? These are things I think we could talk about, and instead of coming up with the constant excuse, well, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Well, what if the horse had a stroke and forgot how to, or is retarded, or what if the horse can't walk?
I sympathize with the guy who's selling the water. Another Joe.
Anyway, so I don't. As far as the health thing goes, I'm with you. I'm concerned because it's gonna, if we're all going to be required to pay, that's not something that I would agree with without being asked. It's one thing when you're asking me to pay for something. It's another thing when you're telling me that I have to pay for something. So I think we agree there, Uncle Bob.
Yeah, well, that is the reason that some of us are not in favor of large, powerful governments, because the government never asks. The government uses what's called state violence to get you to do what somebody or somebodies in government wants you to do.
Well, what we're concerned about too is the way that they attempt to portray someone who owns a gun, right, under the Second Amendment, right, and suggesting that, hey, that person's dangerous because they own a gun, and then what happens if because they know you own a gun, they're going to test you and they're going to see, like these Antifa people, so they start throwing stuff or destroying stuff, and then you use the gun, and then they use the cameras, and somehow they make it look as though, wow, man, the gun did more damage than all this destruction of property and stuff, and it's just wrong all around. That's the thing that concerns me is each individual has the right to a gun, but the visual effects might look as though it's just it's not necessary to use the gun when you can use your words, so to speak. And kind of like you're comparing, should there be a legislation? Is legislation more superior to the courts or selling it the judiciary?
Yeah.
Is it more superior to use your words than to just keep quiet and say, okay, I got a big stick, you try something, I got a big stick here, you know. But anyway, Uncle Bob, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, Another Joe. So much for Another Joe. That may not be the last we've seen of Another Joe, because he has a habit of riding on the Ferris wheel more than once during a program. I've got an interesting post here from Andrew Camacho on health care, the government, who's going to pay for it. You know, the saying is, well, you know, and when you have socialized medicine, you're covered from cradle to grave. You don't have to worry about it. And Andrew Camacho says, cradle to grave entitlements can work if you make it very difficult to get into the cradle and very easy to get into the grave. Well, we're working pretty hard on difficult to get into the cradle, aren't we? Okay, so I want to talk here about, this wasn't actually something that Lou said in the speech. I've heard her say it before, and I remember seeing a sign in her senatorial office, or maybe in one of her campaign trucks, that said the same thing. Here's a quote from Lou's speech. The funding for this self-insurance plan will require us to pool every dollar the government spends on health care.
Us?
Us.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's kind of like when I asked Another Joe who we is. Require us. So I don't know exactly what the details are going to look like, but I have a feeling it's going to cost us more money for health care than what we're paying right now. And then here's this paragraph appears in the Post article. The volunteer group Guam for Bernie. I guess I missed their organizational meeting. Guam for Bernie. No, I don't think I want to join that group. Guam for Bernie welcomed the governor's announcement saying, we are greatly encouraged to see that Governor Leon Guerrero remains committed, like Senator Bernie Sanders, to the proposition that health care is a human right, not a privilege. So it says Governor Leon Guerrero remains committed. So I know she's been committed to that idea before. Health insurance is not a right, or health care is not a right. Excuse me, it's not a privilege, it's a right. So I want to spend just a minute here or two talking about rights and privileges. Let's break for the seventh inning stretch first.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Mescla. Try their featured special for February. Shrimp hash-crusted parrotfish. Succulent parrotfish fillets crusted with a shrimp farce, twice cooked, served over basil-laced sweet potato croquet, and a crab and corn bisque sauce. Visit Mescla in Agotnya and now in Tumon at the Grand Plaza Hotel. For reservations, please call 969-2652.
Okay, so seventh inning stretch, Wrigley Field, center field bleachers, Chicago. And now we are magically transported to the studios of Tall Tales. And I'm talking here about health insurance or health care being a right. And if Lou is embarking on her plan because the philosophical underpinning of her plan is that health care is a right, then I'm here to tell you that no good can come from it. Health care is, as far as I'm concerned, is not a right. Let's stop and examine some vocabulary here. I'm going to start out with the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I didn't see language in there that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, like health care. And then I'll turn to the Bill of Rights, to our United States Constitution. And starting out with the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, etc. I don't think I need to read the Second Amendment. I think everybody out there in our international radio listening audience is very familiar with the Second Amendment. And then we've got the Third Amendment. No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. And the Fourth Amendment, the right of people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and on down. If you read all of the Bill of Rights and the Civil War amendments, you don't find that anything in the Constitution says that the government will do something for you. They all say the government can't do something to you. In other words, they're all negative rights. Negative rights are rights that you don't need anyone's help for, and you don't need anybody's permission. If I want to take a soapbox down in the corner in San Vicente Boulevard, I don't need a license to do that. I can just do it. I can exercise freedom of speech. If I needed a license, like I need to drive my car, well, driving a car on the highway is not a right. It is a privilege, because I can't do it without some permission from the government. You kind of see where this is going? I've got a pretty interesting article here called "Healthcare is Not a Right." And it talks in terms of socialized medicine, because if healthcare is a right, then you really can't get away from socialized medicine. That is, that the government is either going to provide the medical care or pay for the medical care. And this article says most people who oppose socialized medicine do so on the grounds that it's moral and well-intentioned. I think that's what Joe was telling us there, another Joe. It's moral and well-intentioned, but impractical. That is a noble idea which just somehow does not work. I think that's what most people think about socialized medicine. Oh, this whole idea of the government running the healthcare system, that's a good idea, and it's very moral, because as another Joe says, we should be looking out for each other, and we should be taking care of one another. It's not going to work very well, but it's very moral. And this author says, I do not agree that socialized medicine is moral and well-intentioned, but impractical. Of course, it is impractical. It does not work. But I hold that it is impractical because it is immoral. I somehow lost my screen here, Real Joe Cruz, so I don't have my...
Oh, you have Ray on the line.
Okay. Good. Good afternoon, Ray.
Hey, good afternoon, Bob. You know, I've been listening to your show for a while, but I just felt compelled to talk about or make a comment regarding this universal health that is a right to us.
Go
Let
on.
alone the current government right now, we can't even manage a hospital. And then we're talking about universal health care. Now, us as private citizens, when we look for employment, we look for benefits. One of the main benefits we look for is for health care. So we pay out of pocket for the best, or we look for the best employment to, that offers the best health benefit. So the entitlement to that is that we're able to, have that good service or medical service. So I really don't like the idea of having the government come in, telling us that we're going to have this mandate to have universal health and we have to pay when we as private citizens do that already when we, when we seek employment. And with the employment, we just get good benefits. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, well put. Thank you very much for calling in. I thought when Real Joe Cruz told me it was Ray on the line, I thought it was another Ray, but I guess I could call you another Ray, right, Ray?
Sounds good, Bob.
Okay, thanks for calling another Ray. Yeah, so Raysayers, right? We found out this morning that there is something known as a Raysayer.
Cynics and raysayers.
Cynics and raysayers, yeah. Okay, so I see some posts out of the corner of my eye here that kind of tie into what I'm talking about here. Let's see. Maybe not. Well, let me go on with this article here. So this author, he's a doctor, he says that it's not moral but impractical. It's impractical because it's not moral. This is not the case of a noble theory, but a failure in practice. It is a case of a vicious. It is a case of a vicious in theory, and therefore disaster in practice. I want to focus on the moral issue at stake. So long as people believe that socialized medicine is a noble plan, there is no way to fight it. You cannot stop a noble plan, not if it really is noble. The only way you can defeat it is to unmask it, to show that it is the very opposite of noble. Then at least you have a fighting chance. What is morality in this context? The American concept of it is officially stated in the Declaration of Independence. It upholds man's unalienable individual rights. The term rights, note, is a moral, not just a political term. It tells us that a certain course of behavior is right, sanctioned, proper, a prerogative to be respected. Now, our only rights, the American viewpoint continues, are the rights to life, liberty, and property, and the pursuit of happiness. That's all, according to the founding fathers. We are not born with a right to a trip to Disneyland. Pursuit of happiness, right? I have the right to pursuit of happiness. Therefore, the government should buy me a plane ticket to Disneyland because it makes me happy. Or a meal at McDonald's, or a kidney dialysis. We have certain specific rights, and only these. Why only these? Observe that all legitimate rights have one thing in common. They are rights to action, not to rewards from other people. That's why I kept after Joe, the other Joe, who's going to pay for this? Who's going to provide it? Well, we should. Well, who is the we? Well, the government. The American rights impose no obligations on other people, merely the negative obligation to leave you alone. The system guarantees you a chance to work for what you want, not to be given it without effort by somebody else. The right to life, for instance, does not mean that your neighbors have to feed and clothe you. It means you have the right to earn your food and clothe yourself, if necessary, by a hard struggle, and that no one can forcibly stop your struggle for these things or steal them from you if and when you have achieved them. In other words, you have the right to act and to keep the results of your actions, the products you make, and to keep them and trade them with others if you wish. But if you have no right to the actions or products of others, except on terms to which they voluntarily agree. Take one more example. The right to pursuit of happiness is precisely that, the right to the pursuit, to a certain type of action on your part and its result, not to any guarantee that other people will make you happy or even try to do so. Otherwise, there would be no liberty in the country. If your mere desire for something, anything, imposes a duty on other people to satisfy you, then you have no choice in their lives, no say in what they do. They have no liberty. They cannot pursue their happiness. Your right to happiness at their expense means that they become rightless serfs, that is, your slaves. Your right to anything at others' expense means that they become rightless. That's why the U.S. system defines rights as it does, strictly as rights to action. This was the approach that made the U.S. the first truly free country in the world history, and soon afterwards, as a result, the greatest country in history, the richest and most powerful. It became the most powerful because its view of rights made it most moral. It was the country of individual and personal independence. Well, I know that there would be people who say, oh, that guy's just heartless. What about people that can't afford health care? Well, that's where the private sector is supposed to come in when you stop and examine what insurance really is. Insurance means a pooling of risks. So if you have 1,000 people and 100 of them are not very healthy and 100 of them are very healthy and the rest of them cover a spectrum in between, given the right information, an actuarial would be able to tell you how much insurance for that 1,000 people would cost if we knew what level of benefits the insurance were going to provide, because we spread the risk around. But that isn't what health insurance means anymore. Health insurance, if you had the same deal with your car as most people expect from their health insurance policy now, you would never pay for an oil change or a new tire because your insurance would cover it. Whereas we know that for car insurance, it covers casualties. If you get in a bad accident, it's going to be covered. But the fact that you need new spark plugs, that's not something you look to your insurance for. But that's what insurance has kind of morphed into nowadays. And the Lou Leon Guerreros of the world would say that, well, health care is a right. It's not a privilege. And once again, right in the narrow sense is the correlative of duty. It's a correlative of duty. So if you're going to find that one person has a right, then that, in order to find that right, someone else must have a duty. If I have the right to cross your yard to get to my house, then you have a duty to allow me to cross your yard. So if someone that I don't know, will never know, don't even care to know, has a right to health care, I have to pay for it because it's somehow a right. I have a duty to pay for the health care of someone that I don't know. This is a dangerous concept, and that's why I read this article about, socialized medicine is, well, it's a moral idea. It just doesn't work very well. It's not a moral idea, and that's the reason that it doesn't work very well. So Lou says that Initially, her administration plans to pool Medicaid, Medicare, and other public health care dollars in one funding source that would give a stronger purchasing power for health insurance for nearly 70,000 adults and their dependents on the island. The funding pool would exceed $330 million a year. So does that somehow mean that those oldsters, i manbihud and i manbiha, guahanu i Medicare, you know, that they are going to be tossed into this pool and somehow have this responsibility for the $70,000, 70,000 adults and dependents? I wonder how that's going to work. You know, the details aren't here, but when I see this idea that health care is a right, not a privilege, and I see $330 million a year mentioned, I don't like the looks of it. If we were going to insure everyone on this island, then the way to do it would be to have an insurance company come in and do an actuarial study and tell us how much it's going to cost. Okay, I've got another Joe back for another ride on the Ferris wheel. So another Joe down the home stretch. It's going to be your call.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in the Grand Plaza Hotel Tumon is now serving your favorite daily specials. Come one, come all. Enjoy your Monday with that savory cut and pica. Your Tuesday with your one and only candied salmon. Stroll by on Wednesday to try that local style oxtail kadu. Or Thursday if you're feeling that pan crisp pork belly served over roasted sweet potato mash. And don't forget that miso yaki black cod with garlic mashed potatoes on Friday. Busy at work and still want your fix? Call 969-2652 for your takeout order.
Wow, nice smile. So perfect and all.
Thanks. I owe it all to Dr. Robert Yang and his smile team. They do wonders for a healthy, happy mouth.
Got teeth? Don't wait until they hurt. Schedule your routine checkup and cleaning with Dr. Yang and his smile team. Suite 119 in the East West Business Center, Upper Tumon. Call 647-8702 or 3.
The best thing that happened to teeth since toothpaste.
Dr. Yang and his smile team.
They make smiles happen.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Here we are, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky. The home stretch. And who do I spot in the grandstand here at Churchill Downs? It's none other than another Joe. I hope you enjoy the race, another Joe.
Uncle Bob, if they require health care for all, that would be a huge incentive for everyone all around to arrive here in Guam and stay just to get health care.
You're right on that. And that's the way it is now, isn't it?
And the thing is that where does it end? I mean, now we're having to deal with this compact impact stuff. You know, what's the next thing that the federal government is going to decide without anyone from who is a resident of Guam being allowed to have a representation?
I thought we were talking about health care.
Well, yeah, because
let's go back to what you said. You know, the way things are right now, I understand that there are people that come here from the freely associated states just for health care. And
where are they going to come from in the future? It could be anywhere.
As bad as the health care may be in the federated states, ours, as bad as it may be here, it's 100 times better than there. So people come up here and turn themselves into the emergency room. Yep. And if more care were available and we still have this open border situation, then
more people arrive.
More people will be attracted to it, you know, and it's like Carl.
And guess who's paying for it?
It's like Carl mentioned earlier. When you got free stuff, when things are free, you're going to have scarcity because people don't limit them. So if you go to the ice cream store and the ice cream is free, it's a little bit different than paying, say, $10 for an ice cream cone. You're not going to eat many ice cream cones at $10 a pop. But if it's free, what the heck?
And the best case scenario is going to be, well, we have to ration everyone to make it fair for everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know, when you talk about economics deals with one thing, scarcity. How do we deal with scarcity? Because there are very few things that are in such abundance that we don't have to ration them some way. And the way that we ration almost everything is with the price. And the higher the price, the more difficult it is to obtain scarce goods. But if we go with Lou's idea here, with free health care for everybody, maybe I'm reading something into it that isn't there, but if we've got this idea that health care is a right, not a privilege, I'm just predicting no good can come from it.
I predict inflation, Uncle Bob. It's kind of like the 1849 California gold rush. Everyone's going to be in a hurry to get here, to get what they can get with health care. And there's going to be inflation because of it. They're going to ration stuff. Even with rationing, it's going to be inflated prices. And it's going to be to the point where people are just going to be, they're going to suffer. They're going to have to go without more. I think people have to wake up. People are in a daze, and they have to wake up and get in touch with the reality of what is going to occur. And it wasn't that long ago we had to deal with the Obamacare. So why do they think it's going to be any different?
Yeah, exactly. But, Lou believes, I've heard her say this, and I've seen her campaign stuff, healthcare is a right, not a privilege. And that's why I spent a little time at the beginning of the program. You have to understand what a right is and what a right is not. I have the right to be able to walk around in this studio and not have the real Joe Cruz punch me in the nose, much as he'd probably like to from time to time when he's the butt of some of my outrageous jokes. But that is a right, and because I have the right not to have the real Joe punch me in the nose, he has a duty not to punch me in the nose. But if I say, I'm really hungry, I didn't have breakfast this morning, I'm starving to death, the real Joe Cruz doesn't have a duty to run out to Kentucky Fried and buy me something to eat.
Not unless he's your son.
I mean, he's a big-hearted guy, and he might do it, but not because he thinks he's governed by some duty to go out and feed me. And that's what we're talking about here, the difference between rights and duties. If health care is a right, who has a duty to provide it, and who has a responsibility to determine how much is going to be provided? There's no question about it that the more money you have, the better health care you're going to get. There are some drugs that cost, like $20,000 a month. And there are various kinds of treatments that are very, very expensive that only very rich people can afford. Well, that's not right. Only rich people get it. That's not fair. Everybody should get it. That's where this thinking kind of takes you. So if we're talking about free health care, we're not talking about a baseline health care. We're talking about the same egalitarian impulse that governs so much of the left-wing thinking that we see here. That's why people are anticipating, are dreading feeling the burn, because that's where the burn would take us. Another Joe.
Uncle Bob, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that the Republicans are going to take this serious here in Guam and say, hey, wow, that's kind of taking it a step too far, suggesting it's going to be a single payer?
Yeah.
Do you think they're going to wake up, or do you think they're going to
I am so disappointed in there's only one of them that acts like a Republican some of the time, and that'd be Jim Moylan. The rest of them act like they're very comfortable being in the minority, and like they don't even want to be in the majority.
But then again, Senator Moylan, he has has a dog in the fight because he works for I think he works for his insurance, or his family owns the insurance company.
Yeah.
And so they're gonna lose out big time if they're gonna be required to pay for everyone's health care. To pay out.
Well, let's put it this way. Those companies in the health insurance business are going to be at the forefront of the issue. How it will affect them depends on how Lulu designs it.
You know, I was thinking about maybe all these insurance companies should send a message to Lou by getting together and starting up a new bank here in Guam. You know, the Calvos and the Moylan's, and say, okay, there, Ms. Governor Maga Haga, your family business is dealing with banking, and you ain't worried about having to pay out insurance for all this health care. So maybe you need a little bit of competition there in banks. And what do you think, Eric, about?
How about Tall Tales Bank?
There you go, Tall Tales Bank.
Yeah.
And all the Tall Tales Nation could be your...
Yeah, if I could sign up the entire international radio listening audience, I'd have a lot of customers, wouldn't I, Another Joe?
Uncle Bob, real quick, before you end, are you going to go to the Republican convention next month? Is it the 14th?
To where?
I think there's a convention here on Guam for the GOP, the Republican Party, where they vote for their the delegates vote for the
convention.
Yeah,
I don't know. I went to the Republican National Convention in 2004. It's something I'd like to do again, Another Joe.
I think it's next month. Don't quote me on it, but maybe the 14th. Or you'd have to.
I'll look into it. Thanks again, Another Joe.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM,